welcome to the open platform of Public TV of Armenia. Today I will discuss the involvement of Turkey and Islamic terrorists in the war in Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020. I will talk to Mr. Raymond Ibrahim, a US-based author, Middle East and Islam expert. Mr. Ibrahim, thank you for joining us. And how would you describe the involvement of Turkey and the Islamist terrorists in the latest war in Nagorno-Karabakh?
I would describe it as very much in keeping with Turkey's geopolitics in the area in general. You have to remember that the greatest thing that's Turkey is being implicated of, which is funneling Islamic terrorist mercenary types into the field of conflict, has been going on before in other countries. For example, in Syria, it helped some of the groups that were called in the West freedom fighters, but later we found out were terrorists, were actually being supported by Turkey. And in fact, one of those groups, the Hamza division, which was in Syria involved in some sort of sexual trafficking of, I think, Yazidis or whoever, some minorities in Syria, possibly Christians. The Turks actually funneled that group into the field of conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And also in Libya, the same thing. Turkey had its fingerprints there. And even in distant Nigeria, where you would think Turkey would have nothing to do with it, there have been many accusations by people on the ground, Nigerians, Egyptians, of evidence of the Turkish Air Force actually somehow supporting Boko Haram, the Islamic terror group that's involved in the slaughter of thousands of Christians in Nigeria and trying to overthrow the government and so forth and establish Sharia. So Turkey certainly has been involved with supporting the Islamic terror groups in geopolitics and trying to make changes in nations, and that's exactly what it did in the most recent conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And this isn't open to debate. This isn't just a theory. Lots of authorities have verified its funneling of terrorist groups, including French President Macron, who I've heard speaking about it, as well as several other journalists. So clearly, and of course, as usual, Erdogan and his government deny this, but the evidence is there. And as I said, it's not something new. It's not unprecedented. It's something that Turkey has been doing for quite some time.
And also recently, while talking to the journalists, the Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev was very angry on this question asked by an Iranian journalist. When she asked, this woman journalist asked about the terrorists, he went angry and saying that I didn't expect that from a friendly country like Iran to ask these kind of questions. And he again denied that there were terrorists in the fighting. And he said that there is no evidence. Even he didn't account the evidences presented by the Russian, the foreign intelligence services. So why did they need to bring the terrorists in Karabakh?
Well, first of all, concerning Azerbaijan's denial, well, that's to be expected. And it's also further telling that, as he said, a friendly fellow Muslim nation pointed it out. That's how well documented this is. In fact, there's one video that circulated around, which I can send to you, depicts a camouflaged soldier. We don't know if he's a mercenary or an Azerbaijani or whatever, beating and abusing an old Armenian man and eventually beheading him, at least a 70 or 75-year-old man. So why these sorts of war crimes? And again, that goes back to the jihadi pedigree, because if this is just war, they'd kill him or whatever, instead of having to behead him as well, which again demonstrates a sort of the Islamic jihadi mentality. I think for the most part, Turkey's involved in bringing them in, and that's Turkey's way of helping, because Turkey wants to be involved in this conflict. Turkey's the quote unquote big brother of Azerbaijan, but instead of sending its own military, which obviously would create problems for its image, because then it would be directly involved, it's doing this indirectly by sending in their mercenaries, who probably have directions and directives, oftentimes that contradict even the Azerbaijanis. For instance, I saw several reports about how these mercenaries were trying to enforce Sharia law, Islamic law, even though most Azerbaijanis are secular and they're not, they don't believe in that sort of thing. So, I think, again, it goes to Turkey having its hands being involved indirectly, which is the only way it can be.
We saw the international community where Christian countries are majority. They remained silent during this war. What do you think? Why did that happen?
It happens for several reasons. One is because in America, for example, in the United States, the leadership and the people do not see eye to eye very much. So whereas you can say America, still the majority of the people identify as Christians, the government is not at all. The government just operates on what's strategic geopolitics, national interests, and so forth, and it doesn't really matter. I would even argue if all things were equal, it would actually always want to side with the non-Christian, because the government and all the elements of power in the West and the United States always want to show how open-minded and tolerant and non-tribalistic they are. So it's always best to side with, let's say, a Muslim country against a Christian, because if they side with a Christian, it looks like they're somehow, being crusaders or whatever the case.
Something like this, maybe, yeah?
Yeah. Were you hearing me okay?
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's one of the main factors. The other factor is, this goes back throughout history, but as you know, the Catholics and the Orthodox, and even among the Orthodox and the Protestants, all accuse each other of not even being Christians. So your average Christian in America is of a Protestant background. So they may not even acknowledge that Armenia is a Christian nation, because to them, they're these weird Orthodox people. So that's actually an issue that, as you know, happened historically. Oftentimes, that's why the Catholics wouldn't help the Orthodox and the Protestants wouldn't help the Catholics. And it's still happening till today. So when it's all said and done, that's why Armenia, this very small little country, Christian country with a rich heritage, Christian heritage specifically, is all but abandoned by most of the Western powers.
Recently, Turkish media reported that President Erdogan would join his Azerbaijani counterpart Ilham Aliyev at a groundbreaking ceremony in town of Shushi for a Great Wolf School named after the ultra-radical, militant and nationalist Turkish organization. The video of Devlet Bahçeli, the leader of this ultra-nationalistic party, emerged when he was showing the future school in sketches. How would you, the establishment of an ultra-nationalist center influence in the region, what do you think about this? How it would change the picture of the region, and maybe even globally?
Well, for starters, this is in keeping with Erdogan's general policy, very pro-Islamist, conservative, as they call it, policy. You have to keep in mind, for example, Erdogan regularly and habitually praises the Ottoman and Seljuk sultans of history, who were actually just terrorists and pedophiles and did some of the most terrible things. He regularly praises, Mehmed, or the second, who conquered Constantinople. But and he treats him as a model, as someone that Turks should look up to. But when you read the actual sources of what Mehmed did, including Turkish sources, he massacred just because people were Christians. He went into the Hagia Sophia, kicked the altar, jumped on it, spat at the cross, enslaved women and children, butchered them, and then raped boys and this sort of thing while holding and screaming with the Quran. Same thing with, Seljuk Turk Alp Arslan, who of course, the Seljuks, and most people don't know this, I'm sure, of course, in Armenia do, in around 1019 is when the Turks started slaughtering Armenians by the thousands. And that's when the Seljuks went in and they burned Ani with 1,000 churches, enslaved and killed and butchered. And so to me, that's why when I see this recent conflict where Armenia has to cede more territory to an Islamic neighbor, it's just part of the continuum of history, where Armenia started off as a very large nation in eastern Anatolia, and over the centuries, by Islamic forces, has been chipped and chipped away until now. And so it's part of history what we're seeing. More land is being given away and being essentially conquered. So when I see someone like when Erdogan praises the history of Turkey vis-a-vis Armenia or Europe and the Balkans, he's basically praising Islamic jihadi terrorism and mentality, just like this gray wolf business, which they're openly doing. So it's all in keeping and not surprising. And as insofar as what it will do for the region, well, all the indicators coming out of Turkey is that the people there are becoming more and more radicalized. Certainly, there's still a large secular segment who doesn't like what's happening, but the children are being indoctrinated with this very aggressive nationalism, which is hand in hand with its Islamic identity and heritage. And that's the issue. The more they praise that heritage, well, that heritage was all about conquering and subjugating and killing infidels, al-kuffar in Arabic. So when they praise that, the flip side is what we're seeing. I saw a video of a Turkish man saying he wishes to behead every Armenian he ever sees again, et cetera, et cetera. So the hate is being inculcated by the leadership, and it's creating general radicalization that we're just seeing there and arguably in the region, in other countries as well, and it's spilling over. And just to give you a contrast, here in America, whether you may or may not know this, but all of the founding fathers of America and all the heroes, including people like Christopher Columbus and George Washington and even Abraham Lincoln, now Americans are being taught to distance themselves from them, not like them, disavow them because they were racist or whatever. Okay, so this on the one, even though those people that I mentioned were so much better than Mehmet the Conqueror or Alp Arslan, or all these sultans who were involved in genocides. And so Americans are in the exact opposite. They're taught to hate their own heritage, which is actually a little cleaner, and the Turks are taught to extol and try to emulate their heritage, which is full of bloodshed and savagery and hatred for the other people. So this is the interesting division that we're seeing right now.
So why does Erdogan keep this praising of his ancestors? He even praised the Enver Pasha, who was one of the organizers of Armenian genocide during the Baku parade. Why does he do it? Why does he keep doing it?
Well, I think he does it because he can't help himself. He really does look up to these men, and he's obviously emulating them. And he will tell everyone, no, they didn't do this. I mean, he can get away with praising that man, for example, because Turkey's official position is there was no genocide. So all these historical figures where there's nothing embarrassing about them, we like them. But of course he knows better. He knows his own history and what happened. And like I said, when you look, even if there's some dissembling, and there is when it comes to the Armenian genocide and what the Turks' role is, historically, there is no dissembling, because even the Turkish, Seljuk, and Ottoman chroniclers, when they write what happened, it's very clear that everything the Turks were doing was in the name of jihad, conquest, hatred for the infidel, destroying, subjugating churches, enslaving women and children. They write that, and I've read it oftentimes, so he knows that. And when he goes and praises all these men and the men responsible for genocide, that really should tell you how he thinks and how he sees the world. And it's sad that not enough Western powers who should be able to connect the dots and understand what I'm saying don't call him out on this. It takes a country like Iran to actually bring these questions up, but no Western nation would probably do that.
During your interviews and even now when we were talking, you speak about the problems between Armenians and Turks and Azerbaijanis. You emphasize on Islam. There are many examples when many countries with Muslim governments or Muslim majority population, for example, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, gave refuge to the Armenian families who escaped from the genocide in 1915. So how would you characterize these facts? Because Armenians feel safe in these Muslim countries.
That's a good observation, and I would explain it as follows. With every religion, you have the teachings, and then you have the people who are associated with the religion. And the two are not necessarily the same. The religion teaches, you can see this with Christianity. Let's say it teaches to be forgiving and passive and turning the other cheek. And then a Christian doesn't do that, okay? But in Islam, the things that I'm discussing, so for example, hatred for the non-Muslim, okay? This is in the Quran, this is in the Hadith, or basically the sayings and doings of Muhammad. And it's a law in Arabic. It's called al-wala' wal-bara'. And in fact, I just wrote an article how Qatar and Saudi Arabia have fatwas, Islamic decrees on their websites that are associated with the ruling governments, okay? Telling all Muslims you have to hate anyone who's not a Muslim. And even if you go and live in, let's say, Europe, for the migrants, you can use the benefits and live there for free, but you have to hate them, okay? So that's the teaching, okay? And the same thing with the concept of jihad, okay? Jihad, this is, again, it's Islamic law. It's actually one of the fard. Essentially, it's the sixth one, to bring Islam to the world by the sword, etc., etc. The whole history, you have to remember, I was telling you, Armenia was chipped away bit by bit by Islamic powers. And in fact, this started with the Arabs. People forget that in the 8th century, well before the Turks even came or became Islamic, the Arabs, the Umayyads, were terrorizing Armenia and burning their nobles and enslaving them and mutilating their bodies and so forth. So that's been going on. But virtually the whole Islamic world was at one time primarily Christian. So just like Armenia, Egypt, all the way to Morocco, all throughout North Africa, that whole area was all Christian, and it was the oldest Christian regions, alongside, of course, with Armenia. So was Syria and Iraq, and Turkey itself, Anatolia, one of the oldest Christian regions. So all of that was conquered in the name of Islam. North Africa and the Middle East was done by Arabs, and of course Anatolia, Armenia, and into the Balkans was done by the Turks. All of them operating on this mentality. And because that's what's in the history. So I'm not just guessing. That's what they would write. This is why we're doing, and so forth. Now, does that mean every Muslim does this or acts this way? No. The analogy that I think is helpful is this. In Germany, there was a man, Oskar Schindler, who was a Nazi. He was a member of the Nazi Party. And he saved many Jewish people. So how do we reconcile that? We reconcile it by saying, well, he was a good man. He was part of this ideology, but when it came to the really nasty stuff, he didn't believe it. I think there's a lot of Muslims like that. They're born into the religion, they have no choice. And when it comes to a lot of the tenets that I'm speaking of, well, they don't accept it and they don't act on it. But just like we don't say that, well, Oskar Schindler was a good man, therefore Nazism is okay and we shouldn't attack Nazism. We don't do that. For me, it's the same way. I don't say, well, because there's good Muslims, then that means Islam itself is not radical. No, the religion is very clear, and both doctrinally and historically, it's animosity and hostility for non-Muslims. But the people are, there's a varying degree. You have people who believe in it and try to implement it, and that's what we call radical Muslims or Muslim extremists. And then you have the majority who, in different degrees. Some believe it, but they won't, go and fight. They'll say they'll disavow what I'm saying, but they do believe it in their heart. But then when you keep going, you'll reach the group who actually doesn't know it, doesn't care, and would do as what you said, which they were, they gave sanctuary to the Armenians and so forth. So that all makes very sense, and it makes sense when you make a distinction between the teachings and the people. They don't fit perfectly in any religion.
Mr. Ibrahim, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This is Open Platform of Public TV of Armenia. Today I discussed the involvement of Turkey and Islamic terrorists in the war in Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020. I talked to Mr. Raymond Ibrahim, a US-based author, Middle East and Islam expert. Thank you for watching us.